Hello and welcome to the next installment of the Global Ideas Exchange run by the KTN Global Alliance Africa project. Today we're going to be focusing this session's content on open innovation. We're very excited to be running these sessions. Really, the idea behind what we're doing today is bringing together people internationally to share ideas and exchange knowledge on how we can support innovation. This has never been more important than the world in which we live today during COVID and during the post-COVID response. We've got people joining this session, both speakers and participants from all over the world. I really hope that, I would expect that the weather is significantly better where you are than where I am in a grey and miserable London today. We've got an excellent selection of speakers lined up for you, and we'll come to that in a minute. Just some comments first on how we're going to run today's session. We really want this to be as interactive as possible. So you'll find a chat box beside the video. Please, any questions that occur to you, don't be shy. Do post them on the chat box, and we'll make sure that our expert speakers are aware of what questions you have, and we can come to them during the question and answer session. So I think we can make a start. So just to kick off, just a word of thanks to our funders and our partners. So this project's funded by the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, through UK Aid, and through the UK's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategies Global Challenges Research Fund, with support from Innovate UK as well. We've been working in partnership with South Africa's Technology Innovation Agency, Nigeria's Co-Creation Hub, South Africa's Shimolongon Hub, AfriLabs, and iHub. So a strong thanks to all the partners and everyone that's supported this event series. So just to give a little bit of background, so the KTN Global Alliance Africa project is a 6-year project that's designed to help us work with international partners, African partners, in South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, to help and to work together to strengthen innovation in ecosystems and business environments. We had been establishing this project before COVID erupted, and in response to COVID, we reacted very quickly and did, and wanted to understand how COVID is going to affect international innovation systems, and specifically those in the African partner countries we're working with. So we teamed up with AfriLabs. We've done some desk research and surveys, and we've highlighted some common challenges that are faced on an international scale. And those are the ones that are on the screen right now. So value chain disruption, constraints on funding, uncoordinated communities of practice, innovation governance, data access, and connectivity as well. Then on the back of that, we've designed the first intervention, our first series of events, looking at how we can share knowledge on some of these topics. So we've got a varied agenda, and some of you may have been involved in earlier sessions where we've looked at different things. Today, we're focusing on open innovation. So just to recap, I guess the aim is to encourage inclusive knowledge sharing, very much in the spirit of open innovation to start with. We're looking to directly drive innovation through partnerships and working together, and then really focusing on building back stronger together in the longer term. The agenda today, we've got presentations from, unfortunately, we've had some people dropping out due to unavoidable circumstances at the last minute, which we apologize for. But we've got talks lined up from Mckenna Urey from CLASP and George Kosembe from Kenyatta University. After those talks, we're going to move over to my esteemed colleague, Jonathan Abra, who's going to manage a question and answer session. So please, provide if any questions, you can feed into that, and we'll address them before we close. Why open innovation? In the preliminary work that I've previously mentioned, we highlighted that access to funding, assistance finding partners and collaborators were some of the highest ranked areas of needed support. And traditionally, open innovation really does target some of these needs. So, bringing people together to pool resources, reduce maybe costs of pursuing innovation, and then also bringing more collaborators and knowledge into the equation. The pandemic has obviously highlighted the need for collaborative innovation when we're looking for impact and making best use of limited resources as funds are being directed elsewhere. So in this session, we're going to explore how we can break down silos, bridge information gaps, and leverage targeted collaboration for more inclusive, innovative solutions. So, with no further ado, I will move on to our first speaker, Mckenna Urey, who is manager of the Clean Energy Access at CLASP, and she's going to speak a little bit more on her work on that project. So over to you, Mckenna.
Thank you so much, Sean. Before I kind of dive deep into what I'm going to speak about today, which is essentially a competition, an open innovation competition that we ran about 2 years. It's been running for about 2 years and closed early last year. I wanted to first give everybody a context of the challenges around off-grid cold chain, which is the topic that we chose for that innovation competition. So you can see here a bunch of our funders who came together, supported by UK Aid and collaboration with IMC Worldwide, Energy for Impact, and then obviously CLASP, to pull together ideas around what could we do to solve the problems around ineffective cold chains, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So next slide, please, Sean. So, the context of cold chains in Africa is really, as I've suggested, they're really ineffective. 40 to 50% of produce is lost, and before it can even reach the consumer. And here I'm talking about mostly the agri-food cold chain, because when we talk about cold chain, we could be talking about medical cold chain, cold chains for all sorts of products. But our focus was really agriculture and foodstuffs. And that recent FAO report kind of shows the need for an effective cold chain and the waste that is inherent in cold chains that are not joined up. Compounded by that is issues around climate change, the changing weather patterns. In East Africa, for example, last year we had a locust invasion, and all of these are threatening food supplies. And that's even before we get into the context of a COVID pandemic, where massive economic crises are kind of starting to show, and that again threatens people's food supplies in quite severe ways. Communities that are off the grid are even more so affected. We are seeing the pandemic triggering food emergencies because of supply chain disruption, but also, like I've said just before, the economic crisis. For example, the UN World Food Programme estimates that the food insecure population could very well double to about 265 million by the end of 2020 if interventions are not kind of put forth. And so if we really had an effective agricultural cold chain, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where we know that this breaks in those links, we could reduce post-harvest food loss, we could increase profitabilities for farmers, for market traders, people who are dealing in this kind of foodstuffs, and also unlock a regional and potentially an international market for some of these goods, especially for farmers who are really in remote areas. And these are the kind of context we were working with even before the COVID pandemic kind of struck. All these kind of challenges around the losses of food and the potential for boosting incomes are some of the things we wanted to address with innovation. And of course, getting more severe as we grow into and trying to recover from the pandemic. Next slide, please. So when we talk about cold chains, we have to make a distinction between, a cold store and then an effective chain, because those mean kind of different things, and the impact that you get from an effective cold chain is quite different from just kind of a standalone cold store. So what we have here is a schematic of kind of the agri-food chain, and where the cold chain intervention or cold storage interventions can happen, and then the linkages that are essential to maintain that cold chain from end to end. And if we can maintain these effective cold chains, then we have that kind of end-to-end food quality. We have regulation compliance, which again kind of boosts the value of the foodstuffs, the agri-food stuff, because if we can ensure quality and we can stick to, for example, international regulation, then we're able to open up to those markets. There's also shelf life extension, and also kind of reduction in the amount of waste that is inherent if any part of this process were to break down. Supplies can be made more robust and effective, and therefore, again, expanding the kind of breadth of food supply across the region. So what we chose to focus on really was, we didn't have, there's kind of a lot of, you can see here, because of the many steps, there's a lot of places where innovation could play a role. But given funds and given kind of the focus of our project, we chose to focus on particularly cold storage, and at the very beginning of the mile, which means directly after the farm, the first step, this kind of harvest step in the green circle there, is what we chose to focus on, being that is what is critically missing in sub-Saharan Africa, especially when we go more remote and we're talking about smallholder farmers. So next slide, please. So what did we do? We ran a competition, an open competition globally, to identify and promote the most efficient, the most sustainable and cost-effective technologies to meet cold storage requirements. So we targeted this for fresh fruits and vegetables specifically, and our focus was walk-in cold storage rooms. And these one necessarily had to be off grid, or at least operate at least 70% of the time off the grid, because we are really targeting smallholder farmers, people who are really far away from city centers and population centers, but are typically in sub-Saharan Africans the ones producing the foodstuffs. You can see, we opened it globally. The solutions could come from anywhere in the world, but we required that those solutions be deployed in a sub-Saharan African country, because the good thing about innovation is that it can grow from anywhere, but really where it's needed, the application of that innovation sometimes is quite targeted. So we wanted to make sure that it was open enough for competition that, wherever the innovation would come from, we were receptive to that, but also targeted to exactly where we want our solution to be. We started this in 2018. Our scoping phase took a long time, trying to kind of structure the problem, trying to map who could be the solution providers, who are these innovators, and then trying to also structure how do we incentivize innovation? How do we incentivize people to kind of develop this solution, or if they have developed these solutions, to then be able to kind of migrate them and move them for application in sub-Saharan Africa. And in our first stage, we got 28 walk-in cold storage products that were kind of presented to us from across all those countries. You can see the little blue fridge boxes in that world map. And this was really exciting for us because we hadn't really realized the variety of innovation and technology in technologies that is happening. And you can see that they range there from about 3 meters cubed to 50 meters cubed. So small scale to really large scale. And this first part of the competition was a written submission. So just presenting that idea, giving us a feel of what your solution could potentially be. And then once we kind of our shortlist of that first stage, we incentivize them with a small prize fund to be able to enable them to then deploy in a country. Because again, one of the barriers for innovation is like that extra cash to move to the next stage, right? So we wanted to incentivize the companies to do kind of the next step, which was the harder part of deployment. Next slide, please. So in the second stage, we had 10 companies, and those companies that then kind of advanced and were showing promise, we again gave an incentive of £10,000 to, move that innovation from kind of wherever it was homegrown to move it into a sub-Saharan African country, and where it already existed in one country to try and introduce it to a second country, for example. So we wanted this kind of movement so that we're not just stuck in the lab phase, but we're actually in practice in the field. And this slide is just a nice overview of some of the key characteristics of the cold storage solutions that were presented to us. A lot of them were enabled with remote sensing equipment, which is kind of really interesting for tracking, really interesting for understanding performance in the field. Many of them had thermal storage, which again was quite different and interesting rather than the typical battery storage. Though, as I said, they all used renewable energy. It was principally solar PV systems for at least 70% of their usage. We had one or two that hybrided with either grid electricity or diesel. And then they had a cooling unit with different varying kind of insulation as well. We saw all the way from like really, what can I say, like not very sophisticated, but easy to find and affordable insulation, all the way to kind of like state-of-the-art insulation. So they just ranged across that board, and that was really exciting to see. Next slide, please. And then as well as innovations in technology, we really saw interesting innovations in the way that these companies were developing their business models. So that second step of asking these companies to deploy in a country also allowed us to understand how they would move this innovation from being, a nice technology to being a functional business, for example, that would really serve the end user needs. So pretty much 100% of them were operating this cooling as a service model, where the end user doesn't purchase, the product or the appliance, but rather purchases the service of cooling through, for example, in one instance, the pay-as-you-store model, where you lease a section or a space in this cold storage container through, for example, reusable crates, and those you lease on a per day basis. And that really brings down that cost to the end user to be able to access cooling rather than, maybe all of them coming together to try and buy one of these really expensive cold rooms and try and have that installed and run it themselves. In this way, this kind of more innovative business models allows that access to the service without the risk to the end user who is cash strapped of kind of having to own one of these cold rooms. The leasing model also, we saw that in a couple of instances, and that's really interesting, where for maybe larger farms or places where there's more aggregation, then the cold store is leased for certain seasons, for example, the high production season, or moved around a large farm to access different like small holders in an area. So this was a really interesting model as well for us, and really enabled by IoT, the Internet of Things, and also enabled by monitoring, tracking, sensing software that can really like pinpoint locations, but also kind of troubleshoot any issues with the cold storage facility. Next slide, please. And so here are some of our finalists. Some of these names, maybe if you've participated in this space, they're familiar. Cold Hubs is in Nigeria, EcoLife is in Uganda, Freshbox here in Kenya, and Ecozen are an Indian company who deployed in Kenya. So, I mean, and you can see the variety there from, the EcoLife, which is more sort of like a homegrown local solution. This is where they were using kind of really insulation that was easy to find locally. They were trying to really use secondhand, even up to secondhand, like cooling systems, anything to bring the price down, because they also know that market. Cold Hubs do the pay-as-you-store model that I talked about before. The FreshBox case was on a dairy farm, so that was more aggregated demand. And then the EcoZen was also on one big farm. So there was also that kind of aggregated demand. So exciting companies. And if you want to know more about them, please ask and we can always connect you. Next slide. I just want to then touch on some of the, sorry, next slide, please. So in this next slide, I want to touch on some of the competition challenges that we encountered. So a couple of our partners were having trouble finding viable local partners to work with. So let's say you're based in India and you want to deploy in Kenya, finding that local partner in Kenya to kind of assist in the deployment of the cold store was a real issue. We did a couple of kind of B2B connections to try and improve this kind of partnership formation, but it does take time. So that kind of is a challenge, and it's something that we need to kind of think about as we're trying to spur innovation. What are the partnerships that need to happen, and how do we incentivize those two? Lack of funding affected one of our participants. So even with the incentive that we gave, they still needed like sort of investor-backed capital to be able to deploy for the first time. In this case, this company had never had an installation in the field. And so that also points to some of another challenge with innovation, funding at the right time and continuous funding throughout the innovation process. Sometimes we saw an incidence of, no support locally. So this was in a country where, although there was higher level government policy that was facilitative of cold stores, once we came to the ground, then, there were some changes and shifts in the way that they were applying these policies, which affected the company that was deploying in that space. And then after deployment, logistics, transportation in remote areas continues to be an issue. In a lot of rural sub-Saharan Africa, we encountered those issues. The technical functioning of the cold rooms was sometimes also a problem where in really remote areas, connectivity is an issue if you're using IoT, and also just the functioning in these harsh environments for what were essentially prototypes. Sometimes it wasn't really clear what the fit between what the cold room could do versus what they were trying to store, for example. So that lack of clarity sometimes affected the business cases. And then local permit security kind of affected one of our companies. And so some of these challenges really reflect or echo challenges that a lot of innovators are facing, but some are really specific to this case. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about, last slide, please. What did we learn, and what from this process would we recommend when it comes to like stimulating innovation, especially in a time when we want to grow our resilience beyond the pandemic, after the pandemic? So I think I mentioned this before already. It's, the financial product, the financial offering at this early stage of this business is really crucial. It's crucial that it's, sufficient, that it is, matched to the needs of this business. And it's crucial that it continues over time, because funding the innovation in the first place is great. But if there is no follow-on funding to see its application or to kind of move it to the next step, then, the innovation just dies, and we've kind of, that initial funding ends up being wasted. So I think how we structure the financing is really important. And then technical assistance, huge demand for that, whether it's connections to researchers or to, people with data, with market data, with customer data. This kind of technical assistance could really help the companies to kind of move along that innovation curve. I think there needs to be direct investment in enabling technologies. Innovation is not really just about the main thing that we're trying, the main technology we're trying to kind of think through, but also all the other stuff that assists it, the digital platform, quality monitoring, all that. Partnerships are crucial beyond the small sphere within which you're looking at that innovation. So for us, for example, broader partnerships within the agriculture and cold chain ecosystems are really important to form those business models. And then policy frameworks, government support, those will always be essential, especially when technology is so nascent. And finally, the customer, the consumer awareness, helping to kind of demystify new innovations that come into the market that really makes a difference for the sustainability of those innovations. So I guess that's all I had. I think I forgot to also mention that, that says efficiency for access, and you got told that was from CLASP. So CLASP just coordinates the Efficiency for Access Coalition, which is a donor and investor coalition that we run, apart from doing the rest of our day job. So thank you so much, and yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mckenna. That was a very interesting talk there. Thank you so much for providing your insights on some of the challenges that you've faced in rolling out some of this technology for inclusive energy access. I'm sure we've stoked some interest of questions, and we can come back to some of the points that you raised, especially your recommendations at the end of this session, where we'll be doing the question and answers. I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. George Kosembe, who's the Director of Innovation, Incubation and University Industry Links at Kenyatta University. He has worked at Kenyatta University for a long time, I think 17 years, and has got experience in covering a wide range of issues associated to this field, from IP right through to innovation support. So welcome, George. If you hand over to you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Next. Yes, so thank you very much. I want to keep my presentation very short and clear. My presentation revolves around what we do, and I'll highlight some of the things we did during COVID. Mainly, our work revolves around, promotion of ideas, students' projects to becoming startups. And what I'm presenting in this particular slide is the enterprise pyramid that we normally use. So, of course, in the Innovation Center, we receive ideas. We also scout for bankable and student projects that are commercially viable, or simply students will come in with, with ideas on startups. They want to simply establish their startups. They have worked on a technology, and our work is mainly to support them move up the enterprise pyramid, get to the business model, where they will basically figure out how to make money from their solution. And this is becoming pretty interesting from where I sit, because we are seeing a lot more students, working to simply contribute to solutions. And if I pinpoint three, of course, which are targeting COVID, we had a team of students who worked on a ventilator when the global supply chain was not working, and they basically figured that we may get to a point where we will need ventilators, and they worked on it. We had another student who was able to come up with swabs, which neurophysiological swabs, these swabs that we are using for testing COVID, and also a solution that can be able to detect whether you are putting on your mask properly and whether your temperature is within range. So by and large, you realize that it simply falls within the same kind of progression. Yeah, and for all of them, we are at around revenue stage. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so when we talk about supporting innovations, from where I sit, it's very, very important that this happens within an ecosystem that is quite robust. So and of course, this slide does not it's not does not cover all the ecosystem players. So it's very, very important that we make mention that the success of innovation is basically dependent on the ecosystem and how strong the ecosystem is. And the logos presented are some of the logos of some of the ecosystem partners that we have. We work very closely with the Kenya National Innovation Agency, which is a government agency, mainly working to coordinate activities around innovation in the country, financing, and all that. We have the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. We have Intellecap, which is an intellectual advisory firm. We have Growth Africa, which is an accelerator, and Savannah Fund. We basically have all these activities, but this is, of course, as I mentioned, not conclusive in terms of having everybody on board. So the spirit of this particular slide is just to demonstrate that for any innovation to succeed, you need a strong ecosystem. Moving to the next, where I kind of summarize, the process. So of course, the whole idea is to move ideas from, we have the toddler. If you look at the first row where we're talking about the company life cycle, of course, our work is to hatch, the children, so as a service provider, we're talking about an incubator, and the source of funding is mainly founders and angels. And the objective here is mainly to ask yourself how a particular solution, how a particular technology will be able to make you money. You can see mentoring needs are normally very high. Valuation is very low, mainly because, when something is new, when we have a new technology, we have not figured out, how it will make money and all, the valuation is low. And again, you can see the risk is high. And that's why, of course, support is very necessary when we are looking at, starting. When you talk about startups, the support is normally very, very necessary, when we are moving from idea or project or simply starting out as a startup. The other thing maybe that is worth mentioning is that as much as we are an incubator based in the university, and maybe you can move to the next slide. Just next slide. Yeah, thank you. The spirit of this, of course, is to demonstrate that we support everybody else. You don't have to be a KU student or staff, but any other persons basically come on board. And we have supported many from outside, and this is where now it becomes more interesting, because of course when you come in from outside, of course there's some flavor. You're bringing in issues to do with exchange of ideas, issues to do with just simply bringing in some learnings from outside. And maybe we can move to the next. So the services that we provide revolve around, the services that are provided to new companies, from 3D printing services, design thinking and lean startup training, assistance with business basic, networking activities, marketing assistance, high-speed internet, etc. So in general, we mainly provide a host of services which resonate with any facility that would basically work to support startups. The other thing maybe that is worth mentioning is that we also have our services online, and maybe you can just move to the next slide. And if you look at the next slide, we are talking about simply this particular solution where you are able to get virtual incubation services. So this is one solution that was done by Intellecap, and it has been supported a lot by DFID, GIZ. So it basically democratizes this concept of innovation incubation. So by and large, when we talk about our services, you can simply also benefit from this particular resource. And it's very, very important that as I finalize, I mentioned that we have also been working with partners. Maybe you can just move to the next slide. Yes, so we have worked with many partners. Again, this is not conclusive in terms of we don't have the logos of all of our partners, but over time, we have mainly worked with many different partners, both in the public and private sector, which of course has come in handy to be able to, spell to the success that we have. And maybe the last slide is simply where we are based. Yeah, but you realize now we are more virtual. Yeah, but that's basically where we are. And I wish to end my presentation there. Thank you very much. Yeah, back to you, Sean.
Sean, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you guys. So just thank you to George for that presentation. I think we heard some interesting points there on your perspective, and I think that leads us very nicely into our panel discussion section, which I'll hand over to Jonathan Abra, who is our knowledge transfer manager on water at the KTN. Over to you, Jonathan.
Great, thanks. I don't have any slides, so you'll just have to put up with a picture of me instead. Thank you very much to George and to Mckenna. I'm intrigued by some of the things that you've said, and I'd like to unpick a few of them. Now, I'm not sure that I've received any questions from the chat, so I'll just keep my eyes open for any of those coming in. But I've got questions of my own, and hopefully that will stimulate some thought from our participants. So Mckenna, you spoke about structuring the finance support to enable solutions to move into the commercialization phase, and that's something that we're quite often accused of failing in the UK, because we'll provide project finance and somebody will do lots of work and they'll come up with a thing, and then we pull out the rug and leave them to their own devices. Can you expand a little bit about how you decide how long to support? Is it based on a time, or is it based on a percentage turnover, or how does it work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I love that schematic that George showed, where he showed the different funders of the different sports. And that kind of like, the way we've delineated, like, we need venture capitalists at the beginning, and then we need this kind of accelerators. And I think sometimes people take that too kind of draconianly, and then it leads to this kind of project financing. So that if I'm a venture capitalist, I'm only looking at this specific type of company. I only want to look at early stage companies, and I just want them to get them to like a concept stage. But I think we need those links. We need to make sure that, we are either in some sort of partnership or coalition able to move companies along that chain, whether it's because we're making the connections among the funders ourselves, or we're enabling companies to do that. Now, how long to sustain that funding is, it's a difficult question to know when to draw the line. So maybe I'll give an example of what we have tried to do. So for example, when running a competition like this, the Global Leap Awards, this is the first time we've run one for cold chains, but we've run others for more commercially ready, appliances. So for example, refrigerators or TVs that are in the off-grid space. And so then we support them to do the innovation fine to get to energy efficiency. But then on the back of that, we have results-based financing. So that financing then moves them from, hey, I made this great high efficiency refrigerator, but now I have results-based financing that allows me to de-risk pushing it into market. So then they go into market and they start selling, and now they're demonstrating numbers that might be able to attract external investment. So in that case, we've only moved them, I guess, 2 steps, at which point now they can attract external investment, and we put them in a position where they can succeed. So I'm not sure that there's a number we can put to it, rather the condition that we leave the company in, and the kind of links that we make at the end of our support that enable them to move on to the next step.
Sorry, that's a really useful explanation. And I wonder if it's any different for you, George, being that you are associated with a university who are quite often risk-averse institutions. Is there any difference in approach from you?
Yes, and you've put it very rightly in terms of risk aversion. And when we talk about risk aversion, one major challenge we have is mostly our universities are more, into academic and research. Yeah, so issues to do with supporting ventures, which are risky because you're talking about innovation. That's some work that having discussions with the new Kenya CEO yesterday. Those are some of the things that we want to put a good foundation of, because you realize, and it was clear, yeah, from the slide that I presented, you realize that we basically have a major challenge with the risk capital. I want to try out something, we can think about it, whether it can work and all that, but that risk capital, basically, we don't seem to have much, and it's a major challenge even from the university side. Yeah, but of course, I know over time those are things that we will be able to build. Yeah, thank you. Back to you.
Well, if I may stay with you, George, we've got a couple of questions coming in. I'll touch on those in a moment, so please don't think we're ignoring you online. George, you spoke about physical facilities that you offer, and I'd like to unpick that a little bit. How much do you think that your assets, your 3D printing, you mentioned high-speed internet, how much does the physical support that you enable the companies attribute to the success of your scheme?
Yeah, so that has really been important, because in Nairobi, space is pretty expensive, especially for startups. So providing them with office space, a bit of office services, internet, that basically goes a long way to support young ventures or simply new ventures. But with COVID now, you realize, people figured that we can be able to do things differently. I can be able to work from home, a particular corner maybe in my house or in our house. So that is kind of changing. Yeah, but for things like 3D printing, they have always been emailing designs. We print for them, and then of course we send a courier or somebody comes and picks. So there's a bit of change. The good thing is that we basically signed up to Intellecap's startup wave, which is a virtual kind of incubation platform, which kind of works well. Yeah, so we got into that pretty early before COVID, and now is when we are basically trying to get feedback in terms of how it's working. But by and large, Intellecap have been kind enough, presenting reports on how it's working. So by and large, there is that mix of, physical facilities being important. They were very important before, but right now, of course, things are changing. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
A very, very good point. Of course, we mustn't ignore COVID, but I think we hope to look beyond it and return to some form of normal. And Mckenna, I'm interested in how much the interplay between applicants contributed to the success of your project, if at all. Did the various solution providers interact? Is there some sort of ecosystem at play there, or is it just a one-to-one support?
But that's a great question, Jonathan, because when we were somewhere in the middle of this competition is when we realized the potential benefit of that. Because, it's a very technical solution that we were trying to kind of stimulate. And for new players in the market, which they don't know, and with customers that they don't kind of have a good understanding of. So to allow them to kind of brainstorm together would have been interesting, notwithstanding perhaps ideas around protecting their own kind of uniqueness of their businesses and their technologies. But so from the beginning, that wasn't part of the plan, actually. It wasn't part of the plan to kind of have this kind of interaction between innovators. But as we started to see their challenges, started to see them actually coming back to us with a lot of questions, a lot of the same questions, then we had a platform, a webinar platform where we could at least, talk to them, but then allow them also to talk to each other. And where they also wanted them to make connections, we made those connections. And this is something we continue to see in not just in that competition, but as we try to work on like efficiency of appliances, working groups that are focused on just on the technology, that don't digress maybe too far into the market or the sales, which can get, everyone can try and back into their own corner. But when we're just talking about the technology, then there is real value in kind of bringing those people in the same room, because they're almost always kind of facing the similar challenges. And if one has solved it, then perhaps there's a way, kind of a direction for the others to solve. So we found the working groups really helpful for that.
Okay, that's interesting. I can see why you might have been conflicted to begin with, but it very, very often pays dividends to bring even competitors together if you can frame it correctly. While we're talking on that, we have somebody online who's provided a question, or several questions actually. So Alexandra Noah Mbwene, and I do apologize if I've mispronounced your name. Alexandra has asked, can we know the companies that are interested in finding a local partner in Africa for developing cold storage facilities? And also, what energy type do you find cost effective for cold room facilities? I think those are quite specific questions. If you can answer them, please do. If not, we'll connect you offline with Alexandra.
Yeah, on the first one, on the specific companies, Alexandra, yeah, I would love to have a connection, and then we can share some of those names, and even maybe try and make those contact links if you're interested, just because also remembering all of them off the top of my head without advantaging some and not others is going to be really difficult. But in terms of the energy type that we found to be most cost effective, really our hands were tied because we were working off the grid, and because really there was no option, for example, in many cases for tying the system into the grid. Really, there was only kind of most of the solution ended up being solar PV based solutions. They are expensive. I will say that it's far more expensive than if you had a cost effective grid available. But that simply just wasn't our reality. So if you have a choice of kind of energy supply, of different energy supply, then I think you can be quite flexible and usually agree something tied to the grid, or maybe to a mini grid that is subsidized would typically be cheaper, as long as you have an efficient solution as well, because that also tends to be a massive problem where, because the electricity is cheaper, sometimes efficiency takes a backseat, and then you're still spending quite a lot of money because of the inefficiencies of the system.
Thank you very much. And we'll connect you offline. So that's great. George, if I may, can I ask you, what level of brokerage do you undertake? Obviously, we're in difficult times now, so it's different, but pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, how much catalyzing of relationships, introductions, brokerage, greasing the wheels, or however you want to call it, do you do within your incubator?
Yeah, thank you. I think that is one task that I really do, of course, because the modeling, especially of the university industry link, we moved it away from, issues to do with attachments, these kind of things, work induction programs, which of course are done by the career office. But as we now moved it more to intellectual property that is relevant to industry. Yeah. So if, for example, we have a group of students who have worked on a solution, say for Kenya Ports Authority, and they think that particular technology, they have done their research, they have come up with a solution to the challenges these particular companies have. We approach those companies on the basis of that, So we do a lot of this. And again, you realize if we talk about a startup and maybe they have a challenge around something, my work will mainly be, to try and get somebody from industry who can be able to solve that particular problem, or simply trigger value arising out of the network. So we do a lot of networking, and that is one of my greatest job on the basis of either the startups that we have or simply the IP that is arising out of what the university community in KU is doing. And yes, I can say that's quite a bit of work for me. Thank you.
And something that we talk about in KTN is trust capital. So it takes many years to build up that cohort of trusted contacts, and for them to trust you to bring credible technology solutions, so that you're not just bothering them with yet another man in a shed who thinks he's invented the thing that's going to save the world. Have you been, I don't know how long you've been in existence as an organization. Has it taken a long time to get here?
Yes, from 2013, that's around 7 going to 8 years. And maybe what I can say in terms of trust, and you rightly put it, it's something that is difficult to build, both on both sides, both the supply and demand side. Number one, for those coming in, with IP, with ideas and everything, for the greater part, they think, oh, if we give you, or if we simply disclose our ideas, that's the end. They can fizzle out and somebody can go and make money using those ideas. And also on the other end, going to industry, for them to believe that you can actually be able to table something of value to them. Yeah, but yes, over time, of course.
Oh dear, George has frozen, at least on my screen. Perhaps I can pose the same.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, but we have challenges with trust. Yeah, sorry.
How have you gone about developing those trusted relationships and the ecosystem?
I mean, I'll echo George.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go on, George.
Sorry. I think there was just some confusion here.
Okay, no worries. I was actually going to echo what you're saying. It is really difficult to build that trust with the industry, or with actually the people who need the solutions that we are trying to kind of stimulate innovation around. But what we have found has worked is that we have this feedback loop. So making sure that we pre-COVID, we used to assemble sector players and do what we would call roundtables to kind of ask them what their problems are. And then we go away, we do our research, we do innovations against those specific challenges, and then feed that back via these workshops, this kind of working groups, or in other mechanisms really related to exactly what we had at the roundtable, and give that continuous kind of feedback. Usually annually or quarterly if it's kind of a more pressing problem. And that feedback loop kind of gives people confidence that when we kind of table an issue or a challenge, you go away, you resolve it, you come back, you tell us how you resolved it, or if you haven't resolved it, then we explain ourselves and then we move forward. And as an entity, as ourselves, where our main product is data, our main product is knowledge. It's kind of really important, I think, that feedback loop with the people for whom we're trying to find solutions.
Great, and that round table with challenge providers is gold dust. That's kind of where you start from. You spoke about incentives for the entrepreneurs and the solution providers. How do you get people around a table? What is it that you use as bait to get that round table in the first place?
I mean, Jonathan, money is the best carrot. It's one of the best carrots, but not the only one. Actually, we have found, which to our surprise and also to our kind of delight, that money isn't the only incentive. So obviously, some sort of funding to enable some action is always helpful, because if we want you to take an action, we will have to make it worth your while for you to take that action. We don't give you 100%, because there is some co-investment we also want from the innovator side, right? So we want to feel like we're in this together. So we give you a percentage and then you co-fund. But other things that we found have been really interesting and useful is, first of all, the opportunity to do those kind of networks. So to be in those roundtables, to have the ideas in those roundtables, to sit in those working groups, that's really kind of invaluable for some of our entrepreneurs or innovators. And another thing we found is services. So for example, in the Off-Grid Cold Chain Challenge, we offered to kind of independently monitor this cold storage solutions and monitor all of them using the same protocols, the same equipment, so that they are comparable to each other. And for an innovator to understand how they stack up against others is also a really interesting motivator, because it might be the first time that they've been judged with the same yardstick, right, across their technology versus someone else's technology. And we found that that's been really interesting. Or even in another challenge that we ran, we gave the opportunity for field testing at our own cost, allowing finally them to put their product into people's hands. Again, an incentive which maybe they wouldn't, or an action which they might not have been able to do by themselves because of capital constraints or all sorts of things. But allowing them that opportunity for them to kind of understand that user feedback on their product was also a really interesting incentive for the innovators.
That kind of peer group comparison is really interesting. And I excuse me, I suppose for governmental organizations and local authorities, there can be a degree of kudos to be had for sponsoring or facilitating innovation. You spoke about, now I'm trying to interrogate my models here. One of the challenges was the permits and licensing or permits and governance issues around innovation. Do you work closely with the authorities?
Not as closely as we'd like, to be brutally honest. So we really would love to involve more policymakers and kind of more people who are involved in like local regulations and legislation. To the extent that, for example, we're going into specific areas, we do involve whatever the local governance is, and we try to kind of involve that as high up the chain as we can. But it is difficult knowing the names, knowing the kind of who's doing what in which area. Sometimes your technology touches on so many different areas. It's agriculture, it's energy. Maybe if it's a solar water pump, there's water involved. Like, who do you speak to? And in their own silos as well within the government, they're siloed within the government too. So even the work of bringing them together within their governmental silos to then bring them out and then put them together under, for example, our program is a heavy lift. Sometimes we've been successful, most times it's been really difficult. But at least in the baseline, we do involve energy policymakers. There we've had a lot of success, but we still think there's a way to go with the other sectors that are tangential to the work, but really necessary, like water and agriculture. Those ones we're finding a little bit difficult.
Mm-hmm. And George, oh, excuse me, George, another of the challenges that Mckenna identified, but I imagine it's the same where you work, is the inability to find local partners. Now, if I'm applying to a technology challenge in Kenya from the UK, how might I be introduced to, or how might I be accommodated in your local market? Because I haven't got a clue. Coming from the UK, I've got a great technology, but I don't know my way around your ecosystem.
I think it wouldn't be that difficult, mainly because I normally look at our ecosystem as pretty well developed compared to maybe our neighbors in Africa here. And the good thing is there's a lot of engagements between the Kenyan ecosystem and abroad. Yeah, like for example, if I talk about the list of say the investors that I have, majority of them are from abroad. Yeah, and in terms of maybe getting some local partners, I would simply leverage on the fact that the ecosystem here is pretty okay, because, and maybe by example, I'm using, if I get an email, for example, that I'm looking for maybe a startup that is working in this particular area, yeah, and if I don't have, of course, I can escalate, yeah, to the other actors within the ecosystem. So by and large, I don't think it's really difficult. Yeah, the only thing that I may say that it's pretty difficult is now the other way around, you know, where we simply have some local startup that needs maybe some kind of support in Europe, yeah, you know, maybe US, you know, Germany, UK. Yeah, so I think that is pretty, and I would reduce the problem to information. Yeah, and that is one thing that we really need to work on. You know, what can I get? Where can I get it? Yeah, and things like that. So that's what I would say. But by and large, I don't think really if you're looking for something, you will miss it out. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. And listening to both of our presenters, both during your talks and in answers to the questions, it strikes me how similar the the game of brokerage and catalyzing innovation is wherever you are on the planet. Obviously, there are subtle differences and local variations. Just quickly scanning the chat box, we have a question around introductions for collaborations in sustainable energy for cookers. Actually, I can answer that, I think. We have done an awful lot of work on clean energy cooking within KTN. And so if the questioner could get in contact with me, I'd quite happily introduce them to partners. But clean energy cooking, is that something that you've engaged, George?
Yes, we used to, and we've done a lot of work from around 2015. Yeah, because again, our facility is a horizontal incubator. Yeah, because again, the university is pretty diverse in terms of programs. Yeah, so we had a lot of activity around that, and currently we have a startup that is working to simply install energy efficient cook stoves in schools, yeah, around the country, and they have gotten a lot of support from the leadership in innovation. There's a program that is run by Oxford University in Kenya in collaboration with the Kenya National Innovation Agency. So they were able to get financing, good financing, and that's the project that they are doing, mainly installing that. So we have had quite a couple since around 2015. Yeah.
Okay. And Mckenna, clean energy cook stoves, is that something you've been exposed to? No.
So we focus on electric cooking, so and principally electric pressure cookers. Mm-hmm. So we don't have as much on the more efficient but clean cooking. We don't have much on that.
Okay. So I'd like, if I could, to ask you the same two-part question to close the session. We're in a very unusual time at the moment, and there are many challenges, but hopefully we will soon come out of this. What are the critical innovation challenges now, and what will be the critical innovation challenges when we come out of COVID? Mckenna, perhaps I can put that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges now that we are seeing is the challenge of communication. So even though we've, kind of adapted, all of us, and we've kind of gone online, it simply isn't the same. Those kind of B2B events that we used to have that would connect innovators with manufacturers or with distributors, with the rest of industry, those are really difficult now. Showcasing your innovations online sometimes doesn't gather as much kind of attention or what you would need. So the challenge of communication is really tough right now. I mean, we're all trying to overcome it, but I think coming back into a world where we are able once again to meet up, I think would go a long way to kind of pushing this relationship. I think humans, we just like to be in the same spaces, and it facilitates business quite a lot better, we found, than when we've gone online. So I think that's a big one. Another one is financing. I think everyone is a bit more risk averse. Everyone is holding on to the shillings that they've got and not really spending them as freely or as patiently as they were doing before the pandemic. And that's really going to hit the innovators, the R&D, because they're typically underfunded. And so in an environment where everyone is being much more risk averse with their money, I think that's something that we're already seeing innovators facing, and even people who are really just on the cusp of like maybe commercializing a product. And for them, the pandemic to hit, it's a big business shock. Some will recover, some might not recover. And then, if I look beyond COVID, then I think those funds, those resilience funds that help companies tide them over this period, I think that's really important. Sustaining those a little bit beyond the period where we think it's enough. I think that's going to be important. I think it's going to be important to come back to a place where we're sharing data, we're sharing information, we're doing a bit more than we would have done before to kind of overcome or overcompensate some of the hardships that the different innovation sectors have faced during the pandemic.
So I'm fascinated how that conversation will go with the investors. We'd like a little bit more than we think is necessary. That always goes down well.
Yeah, I mean, we are currently having this kind of conversations, to stretch it a bit more, maybe fund more local companies or fund smaller companies when you haven't traditionally thought about them. Like, think a bit wider, even though the context feels a bit more stringent and just a bit more harsh. But if we think a bit wider, then we can also shore up the gains that we made before the pandemic, because if we don't, then we stand to lose quite a lot.
Indeed.
In this period when we've all kind of been rather stressed. Yeah.
George, do you see any differences, or is it the same challenges for you in the immediate and in the long term?
Mckenna has really put that quite well. Maybe it's just that it's a bit mixed, going forward. There are some innovations that will really benefit from the fact that we have been pushed online. And we are doing more online. And there are some, of course, that will not survive this particular shock. The only thing I see, and I stand corrected in my context, is we are people who like buying things that we see. And we are talking about products that are well established and we know of. So I want to go and touch it and put it in a basket and go to the till. And when we talk about new products, so that will become more difficult, but let's see how it goes. What COVID has done is, make us trust online business. Yeah, so let's see how it goes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for a really stimulating conversation. I've really enjoyed this afternoon. I know I was doing it for work, but I would have done it gladly otherwise. Really insightful. I know we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but we did miss out on Al's contribution, so I'm going to use my prerogative here and suggest that that wraps the proceedings up, and I'm going to hand back to Sean.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, just to reiterate from my side, absolutely wonderful conversation, really engaging. A number of points I've noted down myself during that conversation that's certainly useful to me. So thank you very much for that. Just a reminder to everyone on the call that on the YouTube channel as well, that we have a number of other events scheduled up to come on the agenda for the next week and a half. So if you see anything there that you find particularly interesting, please do sign up for them. would like to draw your attention specifically to the summit that we'll be doing on Thursday, the 29th of October, where we'll be drawing together a lot of the insights that we've taken from this and other sessions in the series. We will be summarizing these kind of the insights and I guess the key points that have come up during these debates as a publication as well, following the event series. So watch out for that. And it'd be great to see you involved in some of these other sessions. So just finally, remains for me to thank our speakers today. Thank you to Mckenna and to George and to Jonathan for curating that discussion and to teasing out some of those interesting points. Thank you also to everyone who's been involved in supporting the development of this series, all of our partners and the broader Global Alliance team. And we hope to see you engaged in a future event. I'll leave you to, just one last thing before I close out. So we have obviously the associated meeting Mojo facility so that you can meet up with people. One of the things we wanted out of this series was for people to engage with each other. So do sign up to that and meet with the other people that have been involved and the other participants. The details are in the chat function on YouTube. You can see that there. And yes, finally, just again, thank you to everyone involved. And I'll leave you with the video for the event series. Thank you.